My point of departure is a curiosity about the role of marketing. Marketing are marketing phenomena such as brand logics and consumer culture in the formation of anti-democratic movements and violent criminal networks. While this background may not be descriptive of the whole world as such, it is no doubt descriptive of Swedish society. Lately, Swedish society has faced an upsurge of lethal conflicts between violent, organized crime networks, as they're called, furiously endorsed and mediated in audiovisual social media by so-called gangfluencers, as well as crimfluencers. Gangfluencers seem to operate in the intersection of famous luxury brands, popular culture, and organized crime, where unprecedented, conspicuous consumption lies at its very core. At its core is gangster rap, surrounded by multiple layers of aspired consumer goods and experiences, including jewelry, accessories, luxury brand logos, cars, guns, artists, tracks, music videos, drugs, travels, and dwellings. As is the case also in other violent endorsing cultures, it is as if marketing's presence, when tightly connected to the consumer culture, does something to the otherwise dehumanizing backdrop. Symbolic and material consumption has a strong sign value, which works to both attract, normalize, and sediment people's identification with and membership in various kinds of communities. In this research that I will do, the focus will be on the role of this symbolic and material consumption in relation to the violence-endorsing Swedish criminal gang culture, predominantly in the periphery, where the consumer culture is still experienced as relatively normal and mainstream. It is here argued that this is also the pre-radicalization stage in which the market logic of consumer culture has an underestimated power to attract people, not least the youth, and needs to be further explored. The absence of more foundational research may derive from the potential risk of finger-pointing and social stigmatization, as gangster rap culture is typically associated with racialized groups in these socially vulnerable areas. However, that risk must be weighed against the risk emerging from not investigating this consumer culture because, as said in investigative journalism, the consumer culture connected to gangster rap, for example, has been highlighted as a pivotal reason for the very attraction of youth to be recruited to these violent, organized criminal gangs in the first place. Some sociologists even argue that consumer culture is the dominant mode of cultural production in the West over the course of modernity. In fact, an overwhelming body of consumer research has shown how marketing can have such high symbolic traction on us that we can go far beyond normative and regulative boundaries. For example, we risk our lives, we risk our economy, we endure pain, we do drugs, and we shoplift, just to mention some bad things. Furthermore, life choices today readily reflect market-mediated images of good and bad lives. The ways in which we organize ourselves into contemporary communities and movements, not least in our youth, are therefore tightly interrelated with and organized by patterns of consumption. In other words, the lure of specific consumption style configurations can thus work as a gateway into new destructive lifestyle. The ways in which we organize ourselves into contemporary communities and movements, not least in our youth, are therefore tightly interrelated with and organized by patterns of consumption. In other words, the lure of specific consumption style configurations can work as a gateway into new destructive lifestyles. Theoretically, I understand this as a conflict market, a concept I have introduced in earlier work and will now develop. The rise of conflict markets has it that contemporary mediascape dominated by social media platforms and governed by various types of algorithms is a further crucial factor in conflict, as it has come to constitute a business model on its own, by way of effective content, algorithmic programming, other market actors, and the linkages between online and offline conflict milieus. The most important reasons for investigating this consumer culture in this research is, on the one hand, its clear connection to the glorification of a hyper-violent lifestyle, which in turn may normalize and facilitate radicalization. And on the other hand, that the marketing and consumer cultural dimensions have been largely ignored in research on gang violence so far. This research therefore aims to contribute not only to marketing research on marketing's role in radicalization, but with a new, fresh perspective to social sciences and policy work regarding the prevention of young people's radicalization into violent criminal networks.